The riot that took place at the Capitol was harrowing for many. I knew I was where I was supposed to be, doing what I was supposed to be doing. I have to believe that God's grace was present that day. I have no doubt in my mind, if Vladimir Putin overruns Ukraine, it'll only be a matter of time before he crosses a border of a NATO country. We'll have to confront him militarily.
For 4 years, Mike Pence was at Donald Trump's side as vice president during his first term. That all soured when Trump supporters stormed the Capitol, trying to stop Pence from certifying the election, which Joe Biden won. He's been speaking to Paddy about his old boss and how President Trump's response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine has seen stops and starts.
Well, first, I want to give President Trump great credit. You know, the old book says, blessed are the peacemakers. And I think the president's determination to remain engaged to bring about peace in Ukraine is commendable. There've been voices around the president in my country and even in his administration that frankly would have cut off American support to Ukraine months ago, but the president's remained persistent. And in my judgment, the action that the United States should take is that the U.S. Senate should send those secondary sanctions that are waiting on the floor of the chamber to the floor, vote them, put them on the president's desk, and have the president sign them into law. Look, I've met Vladimir Putin. I believe Putin doesn't want peace. He wants Ukraine, and he will only respond to strength and unity. And now is a moment where we ought to make it clear, as our allies here in Europe did this week in Paris, that we'll continue to provide the military support necessary for Ukraine to defend their freedom and their sovereignty. But I think the time has come for renewed and additional sanctions by the United States, and I'm going to continue to call for that along with our allies as well.
And do you have any purchase on the 47th president? You're saying you want secondary sanctions. There's a bill in the Senate. Do you call Donald Trump and say, now's the time? Is that what the sort of relationship you still have with him?
Well, you know, the president and I don't talk as much as we used to. I'm proud of the relationship we enjoyed for 4 years. I'm proud of the record we created.
But it looks a lot like Vladimir Putin ignores him. That's what I'm getting at. You know, your relationship's changed. Vladimir Putin seems to ignore Donald Trump.
Well, you hear otherwise. The president continues to insist that his dialogues with Vladimir Putin have been productive. But I think I join freedom-loving people around the world and people who, like me, have strongly stood with Ukraine now for more than 3 years. In the belief that now is the time for action. And in the United States Senate, there's only 100 members of the Senate. As you know, 85 members of the Senate have co-sponsored those strong secondary sanctions. I think they ought to go to the president's desk. And I call on our European allies not only to do more with regard to renewed military support and pledges for security guarantees if there is a ceasefire, but as President Trump called on this week, I think more economic efforts to isolate Russia is the order of the day today.
Would you encourage Europe to seize Russian bank accounts in the way that they can spend Russian money on weapons for Ukraine?
I think everything should be on the table, including seizing frozen accounts. Look, this war was an act of naked aggression by Russia against Ukraine. I think it's essential that the West continue to stand strong, because I have no doubt in my mind, if Vladimir Putin overruns Ukraine, it'll only be a matter of time before he crosses a border of a NATO country where my country and all of our allies will have to confront him militarily.
And so do you say that the president gets that? Because that is exactly the fear in the Baltic nations, for instance. And do you say that the US security guarantee should be boots on the ground?
Well, I've been very encouraged just this week, frankly, by the leadership among our allies in Europe to formulate the kind of security guarantees that would create the conditions for a just and lasting peace. I think the United States has made it clear, this administration has made it clear that there'll be a backstop to that, but with our European allies in the forefront. Not surprisingly, Vladimir Putin has already begun to rattle his saber to suggest that European troops on the ground in Ukraine would be, I think in his word, legitimate targets. But that to me tells me that the efforts of our allies coming together in Europe, a backstop by the United States American military, has captured Vladimir Putin's attention and may well be a pathway toward long-term peace.
Okay. You told us you don't really talk as much to Donald Trump as you did, and we remember your role certifying the election results in Congress, which the Donald Trump administration said were stolen. The election was stolen. Can you, you've just won this award, the John F. Kennedy Profiling Courage Award. Can you tell viewers how close you were to the insurgency in the Capitol, how much you heard of the approaching mob when they were trying to take the election result and get you to change them?
Well, first let me say thank you for your gracious words. You know, January 6th was a tragic day, but I'll always believe by God's grace I did my duty that day to support the peaceful transfer of power under the Constitution of the United States. The riot that took place at the Capitol was harrowing for many. We heard the crowds, but I must tell you, I've often said the safest place in the world is to be in the center of God's will, and I knew I was where I was supposed to be, doing what I was supposed to be doing. I had peace and resolve in that, and thanks to law enforcement on the scene, the riot was quelled.
And just as a flashback, did you look at the door of the chamber in which you were sitting and think at any moment those guys could come through the door? Did you think that?
I didn't. When I was escorted off of the floor of the Senate, I had been informed that there were some rioters in the building. But, you know, I actually served in Congress for 12 years before I was vice president. I had great confidence that law enforcement on the scene would be able to secure the Capitol. I never imagined that the day would unfold as it did, but when it did, ultimately law enforcement did their job bravely, even though they were outmanned at times. They fought on, they secured the Capitol, and again, I truly do believe that what the world, I hope, witnessed that day was the resilience of our institutions and the deep commitment of people in both political parties.
Do you support RFK Jr. as the health secretary? Is he the right man to secure the health of American children?
Well, I must tell you, I and my foundation in Washington, I think, were one of the very few voices to oppose his nomination as Secretary of Health and Human Services. It was on a range of issues. Beginning for me with my pro-life views. I'm pro-life, I don't apologize for it, and the idea that we would have an abortion rights supporter leading a Republican administration's health department was anathema to me. But beyond that was just a number of his theories and his long-standing record of vaccine skepticism and attacks on our pharmaceutical industry and courts. I just had great concerns about that. I spoke out against it, and I continue to hope that President Trump will have an opportunity for a fresh start.
Okay.
At the Health and Human Services Department.
That's diplomat speak for fire him. We understand. We would translate a translation there. Just on the question of compensation, do you think they'll be successful, the jailed rioters, in getting dollars off the state?
Well, I think people that assaulted police officers, desecrated our Capitol, should have been held to the fullest extent of the law. And I cannot imagine that absent people that were not caught up in the violence or people whose rights were violated, that there would be any justification for compensation for people who engaged in in violence or vandalism
Yeah.
that day.
And we're talking about it. And that's why I mentioned to you, it's painful for you to come to Europe and be told we think it's gone through the looking glass, a post-truth world in the US. Because if you take, for example, the role of the Vice President, J.D. Vance, he said of critics in the Senate of RFK Jr., which could notionally include your criticisms as well, that they're full of shit. Is that a way for a Vice President to speak? And do you consider that he's speaking about you and your views?
Well, you'd probably have to ask my successor who he was speaking about. But I want to challenge you. I don't think America's through the looking glass. I travel across our country all the time. I still believe the American people have those same common sense values and virtues for which we're known and celebrated, the same generosity of spirit that the American people have already reflected. And I'm very confident that someday soon we're going to have government as good as our people again.
Okay, so that means that if Donald Trump ever speaks about running for a third term, you would say it's just a joke. That's not a post-truth, anti-constitutional remark, for instance.
The Constitution of the United States is quite clear that presidents are entitled to 2 terms in office, and I think the American people have every expectation that this president, any president, will hew to that.
We've mentioned J.D. Vance. I saw a smile flicker across your face there. Do you think he's having a bigger role than you did? Are you jealous?
I'll always count it a privilege to have been vice president with President Donald Trump. I'm proud of the record that we created. I pray for the president often. I pray for the vice president, and I wish them well. But I don't spend a lot of time in the rearview mirror. I'm always eyes forward, always focused on those values that have always drawn me into public life.
And then just on that question of you praying for the president, do you agree with him that it was an act of God which saved him from the assassination attempt?
I have to believe that God's grace was present that day, and I couldn't be more grateful that the president was spared from that assassin's bullet. I remember I found out about it almost in real time. We were landing an airplane back in Indiana when the news just broke, and I immediately went to Twitter. I grabbed my wife's hand. We prayed for the president, not knowing his condition, and we urged people around the country to pray earnestly for him. And I'm grateful he was spared. I'm grateful the nation was spared, and I'll continue, as I promised him one day before we left the White House. I'll always pray for our president and his family.
Mike Pence, please come back on Newsnight. It's been very good of you to give us your time. Thank you.